Still Untitled is brought to you by Parachute. Parachute is an online luxury bedding brand based in Venice Beach, California. They've created a line of everyday bedding essentials to enhance your sleep. Sheets, pillowcases, duvet inserts, cashmere blankets, and even candles. Parachute's bedding is premium quality and toxic-free, meaning there are no harmful chemicals or synthetic finishes used, and the sheets are made of 100% long-staple Egyptian cotton. They're manufactured in a mill in Tuscany that's been weaving bedding for nearly 80 years, and then it's shipped directly to your door. It's direct-to-consumer, so Parachute cuts out the middleman, all the licensing and distribution fees that cost a ton of money, so you can experience luxurious bedding for less. Parachute also gives back in a big way. They partner with the United Nations Foundation's Nothing But Nets campaign to deliver life-saving malaria prevention bed nets to those in need. I've been sleeping on Parachute sheets for the last few weeks. I have a bottom sheet, pillowcases, and a duvet cover, which is apparently very European, but it's also very comfortable even in the hot summer months. So I have my nice duvet when it's cold at night. If it gets hot, I'm also okay. And the sheets feel like I'm staying in the fanciest hotel I've stayed at in a really long time. So I'm a big fan of Parachute. If you'd like to try Parachute, you can go to parachutehome.com/untitled and use offer code untitled, and Parachute will give you $25 off your first order. Again, that's parachutehome.com/untitled, UNTITLED, and use offer code untitled to get $25 off your first order. Thanks for sponsoring Still Untitled, Parachute. Welcome to Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project. I'm Will.
I'm Adam.
Norm's still gone.
Norm is gone. Norm is not only gone on his road trip, but Norm has been a little bit lagging in his reading of a book that we've been wanting to talk about.
I think you blew through it in a weekend.
Very short period of time.
I took about a week, and I was so engaged that I literally bought the audiobook so that I could switch from the ebook at home, and when I get in the car, it just picks up where the ebook left off, which is the most magical kind of future I can imagine. Yeah.
That is pretty amazing. I want to listen to the audiobook now just because I want to experience it again. The book we're talking about is Seveneves. So, Norm, we're apologizing publicly.
Yeah, sorry.
Because you're on your road trip. You might be listening to it on audiobook, and we'll talk about it when you get back. But Will and I wanted to do a spoiler cast.
We waited like a month and a half.
Yeah, we wanted to do a spoiler cast. So this is Neal Stephenson's new book, Seveneves.
Let's talk a little bit about it generally without spoilers.
Sure.
And then we'll give you guys a warning if you haven't finished it yet when there's going to be spoilers.
Yeah, and the spoilers are significant. So, don't listen to the spoiler portion of this podcast if you're planning on reading the book, because I think it's pretty important to go into it without much foreknowledge.
As cold as possible.
Absolutely. For both of us, that was really important. But let's talk about it generally.
Okay, so the book opens with the moon exploding.
That is the first line. It says the moon blew up without warning.
Right. And at that point, like normally, if I have any criticism, I have two criticisms of most Neal Stephenson books. And I love Neal Stephenson books. I've been reading them for decades now. Usually they start a little slow and they end a little weird, right? Like that is a common thread in the Neal Stephenson and Neal's oeuvre.
In his canon.
Yeah.
Yes.
This one definitely doesn't start slow.
No. And it doesn't end weird.
It doesn't end weird. It ends wonderfully.
So to be clear, Neal developed this first as, well, I don't even know what it was first developed as, but he has over the years attempted to make it a video game, a television show, a movie.
Yeah, it's all media.
All media. So when he finally sat down to write it, this is from what I understand, it was a very developed world. And
it's really evident immediately.
It is a very, it lit up the same parts of my brain that The Martian did.
You mean the movie that's about the square thing going into the round hole in Apollo 13 stretched out over an entire book?
Well, there is that, right? So this is a half spoiler because it happens fairly early in the book. The moon blows up. Very quickly, it becomes apparent that the large chunks that make up the moon are going to start raining down on Earth, and humanity will not survive this. So how will humanity survive what they call the white rain, which is the
hard rain?
The hard rain. Yeah. Sorry,
White sky.
White sky and the hard rain. These are the two stages of chunks of the moon eventually falling down on Earth on the order of thousands of years. How will humanity survive this? And that is pretty much the first 2/3 of the book are devoted to that.
Yeah. I think we should cut spoilers now.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if this is interesting to you, go read the book. The podcast will be here when you're done.
It will be here when you're done.
Okay.
So the first portion of the book is really is almost on a day-by-day basis concerned with how humanity, one, deals with the scientists of the world letting the rest of the world know that the world is about to end.
And there's literally nothing you can do about it.
There is nothing that can be done about this.
How would you maintain
humanity
social
react?
order?
Yes.
How humanity, and just to be clear, not an immediate apocalypse. I think they're looking at 3 or 4 years as the first part of the book.
Yeah, yes, it's on the order of a couple of years at least, and so there's time. There's time to sort of figure out, but he keeps on oscillating wonderfully between the sort of the micro and the macro, right? He chooses characters who are science communicators, who are also in relationships of their own, so they're dealing on a personal level with the tragedy that is happening, but they're also dealing on a global level with the tragedy that is happening. And it becomes quite riveting for that because Neal's very smart. He's thought this through on many, many different levels about how people would react to this.
And you know, the fascinating parts. So the book has 3 parts. If you read this, you know, the book has 3 parts. The first part deals with the aftermath of the event. I think they call it.
Right.
So E plus 0 to 3 years when the hard rain starts.
Yes.
Then the next part is establishing civilization on orbit.
Yes.
Basically. And then the final part is 5,000 years later when they come back to Earth.
5,000.
4 or 5,000.
4 or 5,000.
Yeah.
Basically, the book spans 5,000 years, and it starts right about now.
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's basically like all of human history up until this point, and then there's 5,000 years living in chunks of the moon.
Yeah.
And then they come back to Earth.
I would like in this spoiler cast to not spoil. Should we spoil what the title means?
People know if they've read the book. If they're listening now,
if they read the book,
I'm going to say it again. If you're listening now and you haven't finished the book, you're making a mistake.
You are making a mistake because you don't want to know this going in.
I assumed okay, now we're going. It's real.
Now it's really happening. I assumed Seveneves had to do with 7 nights.
I had assumed it had to do with the 7 chunks of the moon.
And because in the original it was 7 chunks of the moon. I also noticed that it was a palindrome.
Yes.
And so I found myself wondering what palindromic structure Neal found interesting to call it Seveneves. So let's walk through the spoilers of the book. So basically the moon blows up into 7 large chunks and thousands of tiny, tiny chunks. And it seems like fairly stable. Those chunks are up there in the sky roughly where the moon was. But then after a very short period of time, in the order of a couple weeks, one of the chunks bangs into another and splits it. And this is when the penny drops and people start to realizing that's going to keep on happening.
Right. The Neil deGrasse Tyson character says, oh, wait, it's not, because initially you think, oh, the moon explodes. It's just going to stay in the same orbit it's always been in. Everything's going to be cool.
Right.
Not so much.
As soon as one chunk hits another and breaks it into 2, then that's going to keep on happening. And because you get a doubling every time you crack something into 2, it's an exponential reaction.
And I haven't actually checked to make sure that the science is good on this, but I trust Neil to be at least close enough to, you know.
And he got this idea working for Bezos' space company, tracking orbital debris
near Earth.
Yeah. And this idea came to him back then. And like we said, he's worked on this world extensively in all these different media before sitting down and writing the book. He said when he finally wrote the book, it was one of the faster books he'd written. It was like a year from start to finish.
That's amazing because it's like a 900-page book or something.
It is deeply satisfyingly long. So one of the very first things that happens is humanity realizes that survival of the human race will not happen on Earth.
Right.
That's not going to be.
Well, that's what they say.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
They put their resources in orbit. So the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans, all the nations of the world gather together to start putting people up onto the International Space Station, who is nicknamed Izzy. It has again, it's posited several years in the future. So Izzy has already gathered an asteroid that it's doing research on in terms of
Amalthea. Amalthea.
I can't.
The audiobook, I can't remember how they pronounced it in the audiobook.
Okay.
They had one narrator with an Englishy voice and one narrator with a not Englishy voice. So, yeah.
So it's part of an experimental procedure to figure out how to mine asteroids in space because they're incredible resources of metals and even water.
By an Elon Musk analog.
By, I guess,
or his company.
Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos.
Either one.
Yeah.
Yeah, either works.
They start flying resources up. So at one point, the Neil deGrasse Tyson character's son and he go up to Oregon where they've got a space facility where they're firing rockets every single day, getting resources up onto Izzy. And they're calling them, what do they call what do they
pods?
call? Yeah, but the material when they send up all the good,
vitamins.
Vitamins,
right?
Yeah.
So this is the thing that was fascinating to me because it's something we learned talking to NASA folk. There's a ton of stuff that you're never going to be able to manufacture in orbit.
Right.
And they were packing as much of that stuff as they could. Memory chips, CPUs, all of that kind of technology that you're not going to be able to manufacture without a massive infrastructure behind you.
Right.
It's very analogous to the old, there was an article in the Atlantic or something a few years ago about the possibility of making a cheeseburger in an agrarian society. And you don't think about it, but getting the cows slaughtered at the right time to have cheese that's fresh and that tomatoes are in season and that lettuce is in season and that you can have bread because you have the flour that's been milled. It doesn't happen unless you have this massive civilization behind you, which is, I think, where the whole story kind of breaks down a little bit, but
interesting. Okay, I hadn't thought about that. So there's a tremendous amount of time in the first part of the book covering the building of an infrastructure on an existing infrastructure to allow people to survive, to get as many people up there as scientists, thinkers, people who have the ability to make this habitat bigger.
So the plan, now this is where I have my first question about the book. The plan, which we'll summarize briefly, is to use Izzy as the mothership, build a bunch of relatively cheap, simple capsules they can hook together and then spin to give artificial centripetal gravity.
Right, which is going to be critical for people because you don't want, if you eventually want the human race to travel back to Earth, they're going to need some kind of bone density.
Right. And you can't do things like prepare food without gravity. So this is the place where my question is the plan built by people on Earth, designed by people on Earth, a sinecure to make the people that are going to get left behind not fall into chaos? Or is this actually a good faith attempt to secure the future of humanity? And I think it's a sinecure.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that if it's going to work, and he addresses that
kind of, but not explicitly.
Well, I think that there are some people who realize that it's a sinecure, and then there's some people like the Elon Musk character who's like, screw it. There's only one way this is going to work.
Right.
And there's lots of...
We've got to... And he says we've got to have a ton of water. Right.
So what the Elon Musk character does is he goes up to Izzy, and because he has his own space company, he's able to do it without anybody's permission.
He just comes and knocks on the door.
He comes and knocks on the door, and he commandeers his own ship to go get an asteroid full of water and bring it back to Izzy.
Right. At great personal expense.
And that actually, I was that's where the book started taking me in directions I didn't expect, because I thought that he would be a key part of the middle part of the book.
I assume so too.
Post-destruction of humanity on Earth, but during the time when the existing what are the hives? It's not the hive. The swarm.
The swarm. Yeah.
The swarm. So the other part that they deal with is how will a large community of people survive in an orbit with a lot of debris?
Right.
And they can track that debris, but if you have one big ship it's vulnerable because something hits it and it's going to depressurize.
Literally all your eggs are in one basket.
Right. So what they do is they build a swarm of multiple pressurized environments so that one could go, but there's still people on others. And the swarm is communicating with itself so that when large objects are coming through, the swarm can adjust and move out of the way and then
Like a flock of birds moves to dodge another bird shooting, or a school of fish is probably a better analogy.
Exactly. Precisely.
So like this whole construction thing, like as a science and engineering nerd, I'm like, this all makes pretty good sense.
Pretty robust.
As a biology nerd, the whole thing breaks down.
Oh wow.
Because there's no closed systems well, at least right now with current technology, which is pretty much what they're working with.
Right.
We don't have closed systems in space that don't require fairly constant replenishment. Even with the water recycling that's on ISS right now, they bring up air and water on every single spaceship that comes to the station.
Yeah.
That said, I don't kind of care because the story's really good.
The story is so good. So, go ahead.
No, he does this thing, and Pat Rothfuss talks about this on his podcast, the Untitled Rothfuss podcast he does with Max Temkin.
We got to have him on
Pat's
this one.
Wonderful. I got to talk to him at Comic-Con this year. He's a delight.
One thing I had forgotten is that Pat Rothfuss has one of the loveliest voices of any writer I have ever met.
I just want him to read stuff to me.
I came upstairs during Woodstock at this year's Comic-Con, and I heard Pat reading on stage, and I was like, who do we know that has a voice that beautiful?
Yeah.
Then it was him.
He's almost James Earl Jonesian. I want him to just do an introduction for our stuff.
Completely, and such a sweet guy. Anyway,
he talks in his book about how in his books one of his goals is to make you care so much about the character and so much about the things that the character cares about that something would be inconsequential in your day-to-day life is going to have a profound emotional impact. And the interesting thing about this to me is that this is a book that deals with 7 billion people being killed almost instantly. Right.
Yeah.
That was definitely moving. But the tiniest of human losses were the things that had the larger impact. The return of the Ymir and the chaos of that return.
Yeah.
The political inanity that I want to think in a situation where the survival of the species is at stake, we wouldn't have to deal with.
Right.
But maybe we
most
would.
likely would.
Yeah.
So he has the president of the United States as a woman, and he has her show up late.
She does the same thing Musk does, or I can't remember what the Musk character or the Bezos character
she has
is,
basically she comes and knocks on the door, and and she becomes one of the most troubling and difficult characters in the book because she's a politician, and as such she's interested. The character he's written is interested in power for power's sake,
right?
And
which is the last thing you need in this situation.
Is absolute last. And she's poison. She's fucking poisonous, and I hate that character so much.
I profoundly dislike her.
And that's sort of the point. Everything all right with your watch?
I'm good. Sorry, I apologize.
No, that's fine.
It's the brutest thing in the world. Like, if I had taken my phone out, you wouldn't have thought anything. You'd be like, oh, he just has to look at his phone. But when you look at your watch, you're like, oh, are we out of time?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
Sorry. She's a poisonous character, Julia.
She's a poisonous character, Julia, yeah. And there's so much that they take you through in terms of those personal losses, even down to the Neil deGrasse Tyson type character falling in love.
Like literally as the world is ending.
As the world is ending. Neil has an amazing ear for that oscillation between the micro and the macro.
It's astounding because, like I said, the things that had the biggest impact were the smallest things. The loss of some robots or something that Yeah.
So there's the book is packed with these beautiful moments, and you're really wondering as you're reading it how it's going to come about. Like, so now I know the white rain is the hard rain is going to happen. So I'm wondering when they're going to get to it. Right? Like, are they going to get to it early? Because it feels at the beginning of the book like you're moving along at a very fast clip.
And is it going to be like a Michael Bay scene where all of a sudden there's basketball-sized pieces of rock destroying cities left and right? And he kind of just skips over that.
He does. He gets to that point. And so at the point at which the world is ending, he definitely moves the camera lens to the International Space Station just to deal with what's going on up there.
Well, there's this moment. There's a wonderful moment with one of the characters that's been on the space station since the beginning of the story, and her father.
Yeah.
And they communicate using shortwave radio and Morse code.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
Which is line of sight for him from his compound in Oregon.
in Alaska or Oregon. It's Alaska or Oregon? It's what Pacific Coast someplace.
Yes. Pacific Northwest.
He like that was one of the moments for me that I was just weeping and had to stop reading the book because I was like, he's literally, the world is burning around him and he's taking the extra 5 minutes to say goodbye to his daughter and wish her luck before he runs across and locks himself in a vault underground.
Because he's a miner.
Yeah.
And that's why she's on the space station, because she's a metallurgist and mining specialist.
Dinah is her name.
What's that?
Dinah is her name.
Dinah, right. And Dinah is the one who is using robots to mine Amalthea, the asteroid that actually turns out to be very important because most of the space station can live in the lee of Amalthea, which is a great protection against objects.
It's a big giant shield.
It's a huge shield, both from objects and from solar rays, which are the other very, very dangerous thing up there.
So
cosmic rays.
Okay, so we've gotten to the end of part one.
Now the hard rain has killed all of humanity, and the remaining, what is it, a couple thousand?
1,500, I think, or 2,000. There's a very Battlestar Galactica scene with this where they're talking about the remainder of humanity being in these fragile little spaceships.
I didn't know where my phone was.
Yeah.
I got nervous.
You got to know where your towel is. The phone doesn't matter. There's this amazing moment when they're like the enormity of, hey, all of our 50,000 years of shared history is bundled up in these tiny little dinky spaceships.
Right.
That probably we maybe made some mistakes on the design of.
Right, because they've also packed all of human history, all of the books, all of the movies, every bit of media humanity has generated and been able to send up to the space, to the colony.
The segment when the Neil deGrasse Tyson character goes to Nepal and goes on like so one of the things we didn't talk about at all is the lottery. The lottery is to bring the best and the brightest children of the world from each culture and train them and send up the people who pass onto the station, presumably with a bit of a female skew.
Yes,
for obvious reasons.
It becomes very clear early in the book that women are far more suited for space travel than men are.
Right.
They're smaller. They use less resources. They turn out to get less nauseous.
It turns out you can make you can make more people with them and not with the men.
Yes, that's definitely going to be a thing. So there's two factions that end up existing up there in space after the destruction of the world. And one faction are the scientists and the engineers that make up Izzy and the infrastructure that helps keep everything running. The other faction are the best and the brightest, representing as much of humanity as they were able to get up within the time allotted.
By launching literally constantly for indefinitely.
And as you would imagine, the getting up onto the swarm towards the end becomes hotly contested. Nukes are detonated on Earth in order to protect one of the launch sites on the west coast on the eastern coast of South America. It gets very, very intense.
It basically, it starts to collapse.
Right.
And it starts to collapse in a kind of predictable way. Everybody makes contingency plans, it seems like, based on, going in holes in the ground or going deep under the sea or whatever they think that they can do.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, we're talking about something that's literally going to boil the oceans from the earth, right?
For thousands of years.
Yeah. So this was my least favorite part of the book. Frankly, the part two, just because I found the politicking between the Julia faction and the science faction
so stressful,
maddening.
It was super, super stressful. And then you keep on wondering. So as you're reading, it's like this is why books are better than movies. I think on a deep scale
for especially for stuff that has nuance.
Well, you in a movie, it's like if the actor who gets $20 million hasn't is in danger, you kind of know he's not going to die.
Right.
As my friend said about the movie Unstoppable, I'm pretty sure it's stoppable.
Yeah. So
You know this, but in the book, I kept on wondering, how are we going to get there from here? I know that because everyone's been saying it, the moon blows up, the book spans 5,000 years. As soon as it starts, a dozen years into the future or so, I realized, okay, at some point we're going to leap. I don't know when that leap is going to happen, and I don't know what it's going to look like. So you keep on wondering, and things just, that whole part 2, which is post-destruction of the Earth, pre the leap 5,000 years, that whole part 2 is so stressful.
it's the nadir. It's diving toward the collapse. And
you realize that it really is, you are in danger of losing everybody. You're in danger of the politicking causing horrifying rifts.
And this is where I thought it was a parable for politics in America, because you have this one side that's seemingly trying to make the right decisions on both a short and a long term.
Yeah.
And then another side that's completely willfully ignorant of your actual status and where you are in the world, that's making the decisions that's right for them in the very short term.
Right.
And I wondered why they
encouraging other people to make decisions for the short term
with bad information and I frankly, I wondered why they didn't just fire Julia out of the airlock about midway through part 2.
Yeah,
yeah.
Again, as a commentary, I appreciate. Like I said, I know Neal. He's a friend of mine, and I think we have very similar politics. And he was making a point, and it's a really good and important point.
Yeah.
And that whole part 2, terrible things keep happening. The politicking causes parts of the swarm to split off and go to Mars.
Then a bad actor inside the swarm causes a hack that causes a massive loss of life and resources.
And slowly the life is continually diminished. The number of living bodies becomes more and more diminished.
And it dwindles. So this was one of the things that I loved about Battlestar, was that number on the board in Rosalind's office.
Yeah.
And it just goes down every week.
Yeah.
So then it goes up and people are so happy.
Yeah.
You look at this and during this time, there's just a sense of dread, because I know even if they manage to survive, until they can find a place to put greenhouses and to start growing plants and to start making algae into food, they're literally going to be subsisting on protein gruel for 50, 70, 100, 200 years.
Who knows? Yeah.
Right.
Could be insects. It's a snow piercer.
Right. It is incredibly grim. To the point that you literally have the Snowpiercer moment where somebody's like, well, I chopped off my leg because we needed some protein.
Yeah.
And then there's an even bigger divide between the cannibals and the not cannibals.
That gets really intense.
It's yeah.
Basically, there becomes this point at which the last surviving members on Izzy manage. So the Elon Musk character comes back with water in the form of an asteroid, and it's brilliantly. Again, this is where it comes into sort of Martian territory, because they basically take a one-way trip to an asteroid that's close but quite far,
right?
And use the water in that asteroid as rocket fuel to get back. They don't make it back alive, but the asteroid does, and thus the remainder of humanity now has enough water for
trips
and choices. For fuel, and they have choices.
Yeah.
It is a resource that can't be replicated up there.
But but even those choices, each of those choices is fraught with peril, right?
Absolutely.
Like if they choose to go to the remaining pieces of the moon, which are relatively safe, then they have to leave this relative safety of the Van Allen belts, which protect you from a lot of cosmic radiation.
Yes.
If you choose to go to Mars, God only knows how that's going to work out. Probably badly. Or if you can stay in low Earth orbit and just keep dodging rocks for a few thousand years. But the amount of attrition that happened in the first 10 years of that makes it pretty evident that is a losing scenario.
Yeah. So eventually the remainder of humanity ends up being able to replicate the protection of Amalthea and fly their little compound into one of the remaining chunks of the moon.
Right. A hard iron section that has a canyon that they can protect themselves.
Where they will be protected from cosmic rays where they can achieve artificial gravity. Is that?
I don't think they have artificial gravity in there.
Okay.
But it's something they can. The long-term goal is to move into this cleft in the rock and then cover it and fill it with air.
Now, and one of the remaining characters is a biologist who has
Moira.
She has all of the best information that Earth has been able to gather about genetically continuing the human race.
Right.
And
this is stuff we don't have now.
Right.
Just FYI.
Right. This is one of the leaps, right? It's like, how do you grow dinosaurs from DNA?
Right.
And
life finds a way, Adam.
Yes. Right. And there becomes this moment at which, and I've read thousands of books. This is one of my favorite reveals I have ever come across in literature. And it is the title of the book, is you realize that there are 7 women left, and they are the Seveneves.
7 women of childbearing age.
7 women of childbearing age, and that's what Seveneves is.
So literally, I just got chills.
I know, I'm getting a little choked up because I came to this part of the book. It was about 2:30 in the morning of the weekend. I was polishing it off, and I literally dropped the book and openly wept. I couldn't believe how lovely that construction was. Of course.
But I mean, it highlights the fragility of our existence as a whole. Yeah. Even today.
Yeah.
Like, we're one bad asteroid away from never existing.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And the responsibility that we all have to make sure that continues. And it came, like, this is the situation. The seven women that are left, 2 of them are on the Julia side, including Julia.
Yeah.
And you know, they had the option. They have the option to, hey, let's get rid of the bad people,
right,
and start from scratch. But we're only gonna have 5 people left. And like, no, the math is really bad on that.
The math is terrible.
It's a bad idea.
We need every
amount of DNA we have left,
good or ill. We need every bit of DNA diversity that we can get out of this.
So they start. And they basically come to this agreement. They literally have a conversation that could have ended with, fuck it, we're shutting the whole thing down. This is the end of the human race. We had a good run, but you guys, I'm going to blow this place up because I can't take you people anymore.
Exactly. They make them come to they come to a decision, and that decision, almost immediately, you jump 5,000 years into the future.
But the decision is interesting of itself. The decision is that we're going to use the technology we have to genetically modify ourselves, and we each get to choose one trait.
Right.
On each subsequent child that we produce to tweak. Right. So we're not going to do whole hog genetic modification. We're not going to make Khan.
Right.
But if you want people to be smarter, if you want them to be more compassionate, if you want them to be whatever, we have. Now, this is a huge leap, obviously. But the upshot is it's an amazing setup for part 3.
So riveting. And then part 3, I'm not sure we have time here. I mean, I don't want to cover too much of part 3 here, but
we could save part 3 for Norm, too.
We could save part 3 for Norm. Let's do that.
Okay.
Let's do that, because Norm, it's time for finishing. It's time for finishing Seveneves.
People are going to be screaming at their radios right now. The thing I will say about the book in general is that he left a lot of, not exactly loose ends, but kind of hanging ends that are
plenty of hanging, and he wanted to. I mean, yeah.
And he's not much of a sequel guy, generally speaking.
No, but this is a mature world that he developed to have long-ranging and far-reaching plots and implications and other explorations. And there's tons. When you finally get to part 3, there's tons that's not dealt with.
Right.
And that you're like,
what happened to the Martians, Adam?
Right. Exactly. It's also incredibly optimistic. It's science fiction, and it's very optimistic about the tenacity of life in general and humanity specifically.
I mean, the first part was. The part 1 was an incredible page turner for me. I literally couldn't stop. Part 2 was
stressful,
incredibly depressing.
Yep.
Just because I
totally agree.
Yeah,
and the getting, and maybe that's what makes the reveal of the title, why the title is what it is, so intense, is because you've endured so much stress to get to this. You realize. I guess that's it. You realize, oh, right, humanity will survive, and it will survive because of these 7 women.
Right.
For good or ill, they have decided to make that call. And when you realize that you're done with this stressful part and you get to move forward. It's such a relief.
And then there's this amazing adventure in the third part.
And the adventure is wonderful. I want to read sequels. I want to see more about this.
I will read as many books as he produces in this world.
Or television series.
Whatever.
Or,
I mean, like, look, you can make a cartoon with cardboard cut. You can make South Park style cartoon. I'll watch that.
So please don't recommend the spoiler part of this spoiler cast to anyone who hasn't read this book. Really, seriously, you got to read it. That reveal, don't spoil the title for anybody.
Right. Honestly,
when people ask you, let me just point this out. My wife, she's not going to listen to this podcast, and I'm going to tell her not to.
She does listen to the okay.
No, she's not going to listen to this one.
Okay.
When she asked me, what's the title? What does the title mean? I said, it's ambiguous.
That's a good way
That's
to do
what
this.
you should say. Don't go, oh, it's such a great reveal. Don't do that. Don't tell anyone that the title has an amazing reveal.
The fact that there's a spoiler is a spoiler.
It is. Don't even tell her that chick in the crying game is a man.
Here's the thing. If people ask, if you recommend the book to people, tell them the moon blows up in the first sentence and it's about society
Collapsing.
and human civilization collapsing.
Yeah.
That's enough.
Bang.
If people don't want to read it based on that, they're not going to want to read it.
Right.
So
don't tell them there's a huge spoiler about the title.
It's a lovely.
Keep that a secret between us.
It's funny. I have loved many Neal Stephenson books over the years. Diamond Age, Snow Crash, Cryptonomicon. I even like the Baroque stuff, which is a little, and I love An Anthem. I love Reamdy.
Super wonderful.
Yeah, this is far and away my favorite book that he's written.
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't even thought on that scale.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to get Neal onto the talking room. We've talked about it.
Yeah, we've gotten halfway there and then punted at the last minute.
We're gonna get Neal onto the talking room because he's a friend of mine, and he's a wonderful.
I want to.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not gonna. He's good. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you. He's not going to tell you anything that you want to know about the book.
Oh, that's fine.
Which is fine.
That's totally fine.
I don't want him to tell us anything. I love the book's ambiguity where it is.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the spoiler cast. We'll do the part 3 spoiler cast with Norm.
We will do the part 3 spoiler cast with Norm. So it's a 2-part spoiler cast.
Or if he doesn't read the book, we'll just do it in a couple weeks.
Read the book. Read the book. It's really vital that you read this book. I'm gratified by how many people have tweeted and put up on Tessa that they read The Martian because of the stuff that we talked about, because The Martian's an amazing book. Seveneves, also completely amazing, and I can't recommend it enough.
People have asked for recommendations. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard amazing things about Kim Stanley Robinson's new book.
Oh.
Kim Stanley Robinson wrote the Red Mars trilogy, of which I think Red Mars is a masterwork and the rest are pretty good.
Okay.
But it's a very hard science fiction, similar to The Martian, look at colonizing Mars.
Oh. I don't know about it. I will check it out.
Skip Red Mars,
okay.
But everybody says Aurora is really good. I'll read it and give some updates. And if it's good, we'll recommend it. We'll do another one of these in the future.
Fabulous.
Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.